And we know that getting back into nature is the quickest way to get back into connection, because the problem with everything in civilization is that it's disconnection based. If you look at like trauma, if you really study trauma and you get into like clinical psychiatry and really study developmental psychology, you start to really look at trauma a little bit differently than maybe we were taught. Like we were taught that a trauma is an event that happened to us and that traumatized us, right? And then we keep repeating the cycle. It's called repetitive compulsion in psychology. It says we keep repeating that, we compulsively repeat the trauma. It's like we keep going back to the addictive substance. We keep going back to the toxic relationship. We keep going back to the thing that's keeping us, which is from the real trauma is the disconnection. So the event and the trauma have to be disassociated in order for true healing to happen. Because if you think that the event is the trauma, you're going to keep in your mind, you're going to keep tracing back to the event, which triggers the disconnection, but you're not actually addressing what's the core issue. The core issue is that you're a human being that's disconnected. Does that make sense? So you actually, like, we can actually rewrite the whole story because it's all a story anyway, it's all made up. And when we look back on the past, we are reinterpreting and rescripting the event anyways. And we're filtering it based on new information, so it's not even real anyways. But we re-experience it as if it's happening over and over and over, and that's how we stay in that sympathetic state, because we haven't dealt with the fact that, hey, I'm actually feeling disconnected. And so what happens then we go into the addictive patterns because they help us feel something. Like what coffee, right? Like what is that about? Like that's easily one of the biggest drugs going. It has a functional use, right? But the way that it's being done is nothing short of a full-blown drug. And it helps people feel stimulated. It feel endorphins. It mimics certain chemicals in the brain and helps you feel like serotonergic, like the serotonergic system, your serotonin, for example. It'll help boost that, but at a dopamine cost. So eventually your adrenals start to fall out if you do that in a hyper way. You rely on it like a crutch. There's a million different things we could say. I don't want to make that the focus of the talk, but it's ultimately the disconnection that we feel that causes the dis-ease. And so you might, if you're really on that train of thought, you might have to trace back and reverse engineer your life experience to actually go back to where you were a child and you had that first event happened. And you might be carrying some wounds of rejection and abandonment. And whether it's masculinated wounds or it's feminized wounds, meaning the female and masculine experience, right? And how society has not nurtured that whatsoever. And for men, we have had no rites of passage. So we don't actually have that transition from boyhood into manhood. So you have all these men that are basically have a Peter Pan syndrome and are just hopping around. And then the wounding to the feminine is pretty obvious, right? How that, and this, just the manipulation and how all that plays into, and ultimately all that is just a bunch of distorted patterns based on the fact that, hey, I'm wounded. I have wounding. And that's the first place that we have to get, is actually just get into that place where we can admit that. And that's the thing I've learned with, like, you know, this whole thing about, like, how do you optimize the human experience? Well, you've got to actually get to a place where you can be honest with yourself. Of like, hey, I've actually experienced wounds. I've experienced psychological issues. I've experienced emotional stuff. I have physical issues going on, and now I'm going to allow myself to explore that. I'm going to start to investigate my own experience, because I believe, as Napoleon Hill said in his book Think and Grow Rich, that built inside every problem is the seed of its solution. So you can't have a problem or a challenge or an obstacle without the solution to it being built into it. But if you're disconnected and you're numbing yourself and tranquilizing yourself and medicating it and all that stuff, then it's going to keep you insulated from experiencing the solution. The solution creates spontaneous healing. spontaneous abundance. I mean, I have that experience all the time in my business. It's like instead of me just being like externalizing myself, like, oh, I got to do all this stuff. I got to keep it all. I got to reach out to 100 people and all that. It's like, no. How about I have a misalignment? How about let me look inside for a moment and see where my energy system is blocked and I'm not allowing what's already there. Because if you have an intuitive sense, if you have a guttural instinct, you have an inspired kind of thought, then that means it's already there. It's a seed of potential. It just means the timeline has to get collapsed. And you may be on a particular timeline, a particular trajectory based on your life experience, based on the habits and the thoughts and all that stuff, that your operating system is built into it. It's got you on a timeline, and everything that you want is on a different timeline. Does that make sense? So if you keep going down this timeline, you can't have, this doesn't work. And if you do get this, it's going to be a mixed result. You're going to get this mismatched kind of experience, which can be very confusing. So the universe in all its kind of infinite kind of perfection tries to reroute us and tries to get us on the particular trajectory that is most inspiring, is most fun, it's most light, it's most invigorating, but we kind of get in our own way. It's like, no, I'm on this diet. This is the only thing. I was told by my doctor, my nutritionist, and my armchair scientist of a neighbor or whatever, and this is the only way, and I have to stick with this. And they keep bumping up against the wall. And then it's like the universe, like, at some point, it's like, all right, we check him out. We're going to move on, right? He's not getting the synchronicities, not getting the messages, not getting it. Like, we can't work with this. Recycle him out, and then maybe we'll incarnate him, and then give him another go. Roll the dice again. Maybe he'll get it in the next lifetime.